This video is going to show you what to do with data once you collect it. We want to be able to display it, and there are two different ways to display data. One using a column graph, or two to use a histogram, and I'm going to show you the difference between the two. Just as a point of reference, column graphs tend to deal with data that's discrete, means it can be counted. Normally it's small amounts of data. The data is placed or can be placed in a frequency table, and when you do sketch your column graph, make sure that the columns don't touch. Alright, here we have an example where we've got a park ranger who's collecting data of endangered species in a park, a national park. So we have 4 sections of the park, and this frequency table here shows the data that's been collected. So your 4 sections and the relevant data. Section 1, 12 sightings, Section 2, 9 sightings, Section 3, 16, and Section 4, 13. This is the frequency table, standard configuration, 2 columns. One column has the section, and the second column has the amount for each section, which is normally title frequency. When you sketch your column graph, and this graph here is a representation of this data, you'll notice a couple of things. The horizontal or bottom axis always has the section. We need to make sure we label it. The vertical axis, or the axis going up, always has the frequency. Don't forget to give your column graph a title, and make sure each column is separated from the other columns. And you can see the column ends up being directly underneath the label. So Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, and Section 4. Example of a column graph. Here we have another set of data. This is an example of a restaurant who has recorded how many people have been to their restaurant over 50 days. And here's the data all here. If we decided to go ahead and put all this data into a column graph, the column graph would be really wide. So what we can do is we can put it into a histogram, and what we do is we break up the data into different groups or intervals. Now, what we do is we look for the range of the data, and the range of the data is the smallest data value and the largest data value and the distance in between. In this example here, you can see the largest data value is 98, which is there. The smallest data value is 2, which is here. That means the data has a range of 96. What we then do is we decide, do we want our graph to have 5 columns or 10 columns? At this stage, let's work on a column graph of that. A histogram is going to have 10 columns. So we grab our range, divided by the number of columns, and that gives us 9.6. So let's say we have an interval, a class interval, and I'll explain what that means shortly, of 10. So what we do is we create our frequency table, and you'll notice now in this example here, we have introduced a tally column. And that's just so you can keep track. So what you would do, you would, for instance, arguments the number 11. Okay, there's our first data item, and that fits into this range of 10 to 19, and we put a 1. What I should have said is once you work out what your class interval is, you set up your range. So 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and so forth, until you've covered the entire range. And remember, our largest value was 98, so the last range is from 90 to 99. Once we've tallied up all our data, you can see here, we then count them, and there is the completion of our frequency table. You've probably done this in previous years. Remember, when you have got 4 lines together, you do your 5th line going across, and it's easy to work out, like in this case here, that's 5, and 1 makes 11. So, whereas for a column graph, the data is nice and clean and discrete, one data item and its frequency. When we're collecting data for a histogram, we group the data. We have class intervals. So here's a group 0 to 9. This is the main difference between the two tables. Here is the finished product. Some things are the same. The data is always on the horizontal axis. Don't forget to label it. The frequency is still in the vertical axis. Again, label it. All graphs need to have a title, even if it's a column graph or a histogram. You'll notice now, though, that the labels for the number of customers aren't actual numbers, but it's showing your class interval, 0 to 9, 10 to 19, and so forth. And this time, the columns touch. This is a histogram of that data. You can see that when you're analysing these 50 numbers, really hard to analyse. When you put it in the form of a histogram, you can start making some analysis of the data very quickly.